The cardboard sign hanging from the rusted chain-link fence trembled in the wind, as if it were ashamed of what it announced. Beneath it, on a patch of brittle grass in a forgotten corner of a county fairground in Ohio, a thin man sat on a folding chair, cradling a trembling brown dog against his chest. A small crowd gathered, not out of compassion, but curiosity. The sign read that both of them were part of the auction. His name was Marcus. The dog's name was Rusty. And if you had walked past them that afternoon, you might have told yourself it wasn't your business. But what if it had been you sitting there? What if the world had stripped you of everything? Your home, your job, your dignity, until all you had left was the warm heartbeat of a creature who loved you without question? Would you let them take that away too? Marcus hadn't always looked like a man people avoided. Years ago, he had been broad-shouldered and steady, working construction in Dayton, saving for a small house with his wife, Hannah. They had laughed easily back then. They had talked about children. Then the scaffolding collapsed one October morning, and with it went his lower spine strength. He survived, but he would never lift heavy beams again. The pain became a permanent resident in his body, and the medical bills followed like vultures. Hannah tried to stay strong, but strength has limits when creditors call daily and the lights flicker off more than once. The argument started small and grew sharp. Marcus watched the disappointment settle in her eyes, the kind that doesn't shout but slowly suffocates. When she finally left, she didn't slam the door. She simply closed it softly behind her, which somehow hurt more. Rusty came into Marcus's life a week after the divorce papers were signed. The dog had been abandoned near a gas station, ribs visible, one ear torn. Marcus had been sitting in his truck, soon to be repossessed, staring at the steering wheel, wondering how a man could disappear while still breathing. Rusty had limped toward him, tail giving a cautious wag. Marcus had shared the last of his beef jerky. The dog had followed him home, or rather, followed him to the small apartment that would also soon be gone. When the eviction notice arrived, Marcus folded it neatly and placed it on the kitchen counter. He packed what he could into a duffel bag. There was no room in shelters for dogs, he was told more than once. "You can surrender him," one volunteer had suggested gently. Marcus nodded, but he never did. Rusty slept curled against his chest in the back seat of the truck until the bank took that too. By winter, they were living under a bridge near the Great Miami River. Marcus's hands cracked from the cold. Rusty's fur thinned. Yet every morning, the dog licked his face as if it were the start of a brand new life. That simple, stubborn loyalty kept Marcus from stepping into the river on the nights when the darkness whispered too convincingly. The auction had not been Marcus's idea. It had been Trent's, a local scrapyard owner who occasionally let Marcus sweep floors for a few dollars. Trent had watched Marcus grow weaker, watched Rusty curl protectively at his feet. One afternoon, Trent had shaken his head and muttered that people online would pay for anything these days. "A story like yours," he had said. "Someone might bid. Maybe a farm needs a caretaker. Maybe some rich lady wants to feel generous." It sounded cruel, but it also sounded like a chance. So the post was made. A broken man and his loyal dog, seeking a place to belong. Bidding starts at $500. Marcus had agreed only because the alternative felt like surrendering Rusty to a shelter where older dogs rarely lasted long. If someone bid, he would go wherever they wanted, do whatever he could, just as long as Rusty came too. On the day of the auction, a small platform was set up near the flea market stalls. The auctioneer, a red-faced man named Carl, tried to make it sound light-hearted, but there was an unease in the air. People whispered. Some laughed nervously. Others shook their heads. Marcus kept his eyes on Rusty's graying muzzle, feeling the steady rise and fall of the dog's breath. Bidding started slow. 500. 6. 1,000. The numbers floated around him as if they belonged to someone else's life. Each raise felt like a measurement of his worth, reduced to a dollar amount. Rusty stirred when the crowd clapped at 2,000. Marcus buried his face in the dog's neck, breathing in the scent of dust and sun. Near the back stood a woman in a faded green coat. Her name was Abigail. She hadn't planned on attending an auction that day. She had come to the flea market looking for old vinyl records, something to fill the silence in the farmhouse she now occupied alone. Her husband Thomas had passed the previous spring after a brief illness that left her world hollow and echoing. The farmhouse felt too large, too quiet. The fields stretched endlessly, but there was no one to share the sunsets with. Abigail noticed Marcus because he wasn't looking at the crowd. He wasn't performing his misery. He looked like a man already apologizing for taking up space, and the way he held Rusty, it wasn't desperation, it was devotion. The bidding stalled at $3,000. Carl called out for more. A teenager snickered. Someone muttered that it was ridiculous. Marcus felt heat crawl up his neck. Maybe this had been a mistake. Maybe dignity, once auctioned, never returns. Then Abigail raised her hand. 4,000. The crowd shifted. Carl's eyebrows lifted. He scanned for counteroffers. None came. The gavel struck wood with a sound that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Sold. For a moment, Marcus didn't move. He had imagined many endings to this day, but none felt real. Abigail walked forward slowly, her boots crunching on gravel. Up close, Marcus saw fine lines around her eyes, the kind carved by both laughter and grief. She didn't look at him like he was a bargain. She looked at him like he was human. The paperwork was simple. Trent handled most of it, pocketing a small percentage. Abigail insisted that Marcus keep the rest. It wasn't charity, she said softly. It was a fresh start fund. The drive to her farm outside Columbus was quiet. Rusty sat in the back seat of Abigail's pickup, head resting on Marcus's knee. The road unspooled ahead of them, lined with bare trees waiting for spring. Abigail's farmhouse was white with blue shutters, paint peeling in places. It wasn't grand, but it stood solid against the wind. There was a red barn, a few acres of land, and silence that felt less suffocating than the city's noise. The first weeks were awkward. Marcus insisted on earning his keep. Despite his injury, he could mend fences slowly, feed chickens, repair small things around the house. Abigail never rushed him. She showed him where Thomas had kept his tools, told stories about the early days of their marriage, about dreams that had changed shape over time. At night, Marcus slept in the small guest room. Rusty lay at his feet, snoring softly. The mattress felt too comfortable at first, almost suspicious. Marcus would wake in the dark, heart racing, afraid it would vanish like everything else had. But morning always came, and with it, the smell of coffee drifting down the hallway. Rusty transformed before their eyes. His coat grew shinier. He chased butterflies across the field, barking with a joy that startled Marcus. Watching the dog run, Marcus felt something loosen inside his chest, a knot he hadn't realized he'd tied so tightly. Abigail found herself lingering on the porch, observing Marcus as he worked carefully in the garden. There was a gentleness in him that hadn't been erased by hardship. One evening, as the sun melted into orange and pink across the Ohio sky, she admitted that she hadn't bought him out of pity. She had bought possibility. The farm had been decaying under loneliness. She needed help, yes. But more than that, she needed presence. Months passed. The seasons turned. Marcus's laughter, rusty at first, began to sound more natural. He started attending physical therapy in town, paid for by the auction money he had nearly refused. The doctors said he might never regain full strength, but progress was visible. He stood a little straighter. One snowy morning, Marcus found Abigail crying quietly in the barn, clutching Thomas's old jacket. Grief, he realized, doesn't obey calendars. He didn't offer grand speeches. He simply stood beside her, steady and silent, as Rusty pressed against her leg. For the first time since Thomas's funeral, Abigail allowed herself to lean on someone. And if you think about it now, about that afternoon at the auction, about the way people measured a man's life in dollars, ask yourself what you would have done. Would you have looked away? Would you have raised your hand? Sometimes the difference between ruin and redemption is a single trembling choice. By the following spring, the farm felt alive again. Marcus had built raised garden beds. Abigail had planted sunflowers along the fence. Rusty patrolled the property like a proud guardian, his bark strong and certain. The sign from the auction never made it to the farm. Marcus had torn it up before they left. He no longer needed proof of what he had been worth to strangers. He had discovered something far more valuable, that broken does not mean useless, and that sometimes being chosen can stitch a soul back together. If this story moved you, please share in the comments where you're watching from and whether you believe in second chances. And if this journey of a broken man and a loyal dog finding home touched your heart even a little, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, but only if it truly meant something to you. Because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness, even from a distance, can help remind someone out there that they are still worth choosing.